seismology and liquefaction. She's also the founding member and previous co-chair of the Geotechnical Extreme Events Reconnaissance Association and is currently the principal investigator of the DesignSafe.org cyber infrastructure for the NSF-funded Natural Hazards Engineering Research Infrastructure. And that's what our topic is today, is she's going to tell us a bit more about DesignSafe and some of the data science initiatives that resource supports. So thanks again for joining us today, Ellen.
Great. All right, great. Well, first of all, thank you all who are here in person, and thank you all who are here online as well. So I'm excited to give you to have this opportunity to talk about the data and computational resources that we're providing through DesignSafe, in particular to advance research in natural hazards engineering. And just to give you a little background on natural hazards research and kind of where DesignSafe fits in, if we think about understanding the impacts of natural hazards on the built environment, it always starts with the hazard itself. So whether it's an earthquake, so we want to understand the earthquake shaking that's going to happen. If we're talking about a hurricane or a tornado, we need to know those wind speeds, the locations, coastal effects. We, of course, need to know storm surge, tsunami, inundation, et cetera. But then that's going to feed into understanding the response of both the infrastructure and society. So one of the things that is kind of happening in natural hazards research is really going beyond just the infrastructure, but looking at the impact of people. And so we want to look at societal response as well. And then the associated damage with that response. So does the infrastructure get damaged? How are people displaced, et cetera? And then going full circle, this idea of functional recovery. How do we then recover back to some initial state? Maybe better than the initial state, hopefully not too much worse, and how long does it take? And so the research that DesignSafe is enabling kind of fits into many of these different buckets. And so you can see it's a pretty wide and diverse set of research that we're trying to support. Now, for any of us who do research, and we look at the research ecosystem, there's kind of these, the three-legged stool, right? We all use data. It can be experimental data, it can be simulation data, et cetera. But with that data, we do something to it. We analyze it, we run it through an algorithm, we use a tool, and of course, all of that runs on some computational resources. The issue often is the missing middle. How do you connect all those things together? And that's where cyber infrastructure comes into play in many domains. And in the natural hazards domain, that's where DesignSafe is trying to sit. So as I go through the talk today, I'm going to kind of first focus on the data aspects and then some of the computational aspects and how we're trying to bridge that gap. So let's start with data. And in fact, I'm going to start with data with a little bit of background on some of the work that I've done over the years with earthquake engineering. So in 1999, there was a large earthquake in Turkey. I used to be able to call this the Turkey earthquake, but last year they had another big Turkey earthquake, so this isn't the Turkey earthquake anymore. But I was an assistant professor 1 year into my faculty position, and I was part of a reconnaissance team that went to investigate this earthquake. And one of the big geotechnical effects, which is what I study, the soil effects, was liquefaction in the city there, Adapazarı. And so liquefaction, if you're unaware, I'll probably just show you this picture. When the soil loses strength and basically turns to a liquid during earthquake shaking, buildings are not going to be able to stand. There's going to be ground cracking, lots and lots of infrastructure damage. And yes, that is me 26 years ago, going out to the field to collect data. And it's kind of funny to look at the tools I was using, a big, huge Garmin 3+ GPS, if any of people know what that is. And yes, that is a clipboard, right? Standard engineer issue clipboard out in the field. And the things that we did is we wanted to document the liquefaction across the city and the impacts on buildings. So again, I know you're not geotechnical engineers, but we were assigning damage states to buildings across multi-kilometers of the city and trying to understand how the structural damage related to the ground failure or the liquefaction. And this data that was collected in the field helped, develop or push forward some new areas of research into liquefaction and responsive structures, et cetera. And this was a really so important data and important research that, if you looked the 10 years after that earthquake happened, there's over 500 papers that were dedicated to understanding the impacts of liquefaction in Adapazari. So this is a very loosely scientific exercise here. I just went to Google Scholar, put in liquefaction, put in Adapazari, I got 500 plus papers. But it'd be hard pressed for me to give you that data that we collected in 1999. So now let's move forward 12 years to Christchurch earthquake, another significant earthquake in the liquefaction world, but a much smaller event, but very severe liquefaction effects in Christchurch, New Zealand. What happened differently? Well, we were still out there measuring things with tape measures, but we started using things like satellite imagery, pre and post, to get displacement fields due to the liquefaction. People collected tens of thousands of subsurface profiles to understand the soil conditions across the entire city. And that allowed people to look at, and all of that data, this was the key, all of that data became available through the New Zealand Geotechnical Database, open globally, not just to researchers in New Zealand. And it allowed people to look at regional scale effects, because now we're not just looking at that one building, but the whole city, et cetera. And so now I did that exercise again, and I said, okay, between 10 years after the earthquake, I went into Google Scholar and I put in liquefaction and Christchurch. And so now, thinking, I put this question marks there so you can at least make a guess in your head, 500, 10 years earlier, how many did we have this time? And after the Christchurch earthquake, there's over 6,000 papers that were written about liquefaction and Christchurch. And I ascribe that predominantly to the data availability. You didn't have to be in the club, the person who went and collected the data, to make use of that data. And so this just is one illustration of how having long-term preservation and open access to data can spur research into the future. And we shouldn't be surprised. We learned this in kindergarten, right? Sharing is caring. Well, my axiom is sharing data is caring. And nobody's laughing at my jokes. It's really hard when there's only 7 people in the room. It's okay. Thank you. But what does it mean to share data? I mean, it could mean something as simple as this, right? Oh, this is my box folder after we did some work in Christchurch. Not sure you know what that means. Christchurch, CHCH with 03, without 03. What the heck does that mean? And I think that's one of the places we struggle. How do we share data, how someone else can use it? And I think the number one key is to organize, organize, organize. And this is where, and that is not my closet, by the way. So this is where we kind of set the stage for what DesignSafe is trying to do. Help you as a researcher make that data available for the long term and organize it in a way that others can use it. So let me just step back first before I kind of dive into the detail about DesignSafe and tell you a little bit more about NERI and where it fits within this NSF shared infrastructure. So NERI, as you see here, is the Natural Hazards Engineering Research Infrastructure. Easy ideas, it's just shared use infrastructure for research. And so if you think of this NERI as this circle, we have a coordinating office, but the key is in the middle, the key components are in the middle. We have experimental facilities, so physical experimental facilities. We got a big, huge shaking table in San Diego. We got some wind tunnels in Florida. Lots of stuff to look at natural hazards damage. But then we also need to go to the field, as I showed you in those previous earthquakes. So we have a rapid reconnaissance facility, shared use drones, geophysics data, LiDAR that people can take to the field to collect perishable data. But then there's DesignSafe and SimCenter, which are kind of the cyber side of things, or the digital experimentation. The SimCenter has developed simulation codes, and DesignSafe provides the data and the compute resources to pull it all together. So let's now take a closer look at DesignSafe. And these are kind of the main components. There's our website. On the left-hand side of the nav bar, you see the main DesignSafe components, and of course, it all starts with data. Our data repository is called the Data Depot. We also have a reconnaissance portal, which is really just a map view to try and get into some of those field reconnaissance data sets. Then we have a tools and applications section, and that's where we try and support simulation and data analytics on various resources that we have at TAC. And that's the important thing to keep in mind here, is that TAC is the main foundational partner in making all of this happen. So it's worth noting a little bit more about the DesignSafe TAC relationship. So we leverage TAC staff, compute resources extensively. Dan Stanzione, the director of TAC, has been our co-PI. He's still on the management team. He makes sure that we're getting the right staff working together at TAC. We use the TAPIS API, which was developed at TAC, and if you've heard of Agave, that's formerly what it had been called, and there's various ways you can incorporate it in your workflows using TappyPy, their Python package for interacting with it. We upgraded to TAPIS version 3 in August of 2024, so just this past summer. And it allowed us to do some security enhancements, allocations for individual accounts. So this is what's nice. Again, we're leveraging the whole staff resources, the compute resources. When they upgrade the tech stack, we get our tech stack generally upgraded. The other thing to keep in mind is when you get a DesignSafe account, it is a TAC account. So it's there, they are one and the same. And now with TAPIS v3, we've gone to multi-factor authentication, which of course is good. And then when any user can get a DesignSafe account, and you get an initial small HPC allocation, about 10,000 SUs, and then it's relatively easy to get a larger allocation via request. And this is not through the access procedures. It's a relatively slimmed down version of that, where we just want to understand what they're doing, and we can get you on the systems. So let's take a closer look at the Data Depot. So if you look at the Data Depot here, this is with me logged in. We have basically private spaces and then public spaces. So our private spaces, my data, my projects, we interface with some of the cloud service providers that people may be using. And then on the public side, we've got published projects, some of the old published NIST data. I was explaining to some of you that was the old earthquake engineering shared infrastructure data. And then community data, which we call the wild, wild west, not curated, et cetera. But importantly is if you want to go into that published section, it all comes from a project. So the projects you can think of as the places is our shared use. That's where you as a team can work together, curate your data, and then ultimately get it published. Now, one of the challenges we've had in DesignSafe, and before that, and NERI, and before that, NIS, is understanding data differences in data formats, data types, et cetera. We all struggle with that. And so we decided a very specific strategy towards data and data formats. And the key is we'll take whatever you will give us, okay? So our data models are structured yet flexible so that it can support you in organizing the data the way you want to organize it, because it makes sense. You as the researcher understand best how to organize that data. So we really only have 5 data models, although we're thinking about adding maybe a 6th one on AI machine learning, but experimental data, simulation data, hybrid simulation, which some of our experimental facilities do, so that's very specific to that, anything going on in the field, and then we got the one-stop shop of other, if you don't want to deal with any of those. I'll be honest, most people just jump into other because they don't want any rules, because there are a little bit of rules in the others. But at least a lot of our experimental data is coming in through the experimental projects. But as I like to say, with this flexibility comes responsibility, right? You got to figure out which of those shoes go in the shoe rack in the right way, in the right order. And so the researchers need to take the time and the effort to organize the data, not just do a dump like I showed from my box folder earlier. Now we try and provide help with that. We don't want to throw people just out to the wolves and try and figure it out themselves. So just a quick look through the curation process. This is a project. You start out in this just working directory. That means you could just dump, this is where you could just dump your files. But you can't just curate from there. When you go to curate your data, this is where you have to start organizing it and assigning different tags. And this is a field research data is created as a field research data model project. So it's got very specific things about field missions, collections of data within that field mission, and then how we relate them all together. But the key is you're going to assign different categories, and then a published data set will look like this. Here are the categories with the specific titles. Those titles are very specific to the research that they've done. So you can see, this was some field data where they had ground-based imagery, drone imagery, they did some street view, and then they did building by building damage assessment. So it's all organized here. We use a kind of visual display, and then below that is the files that ultimately house the data. So our user guide provides lots of information on how to go through that process, but probably most importantly is we have a data curator. And her name's Maria Esteva, and she has office hours, Zoom office hours twice a week, drop-in office hours where you can say, hey, help me. I need some guidance on how to organize these data. And she gets a lot of benefit from that, and the researchers get a lot of benefit from that. Nobody wants to read a bunch of documentation. We all know that, right? It's nice to just talk to someone. They'll point you in the right direction. So it's really a big help. Now, as of January of 2023, we went through the Core Trust Seal certification process, and I understand that you also have a Core Trust Seal data repository here. So we were certified in January 2023, so our 3-year certification will be up in a couple of years. We're still riding the high of getting through, but realizing we need to start the planning for the next certification. If you're not aware of what this means, we get evaluated on 16 components across 3 themes: organizational infrastructure, how do we manage the digital objects, and the technology as well. And what's interesting is if you look at the registered data repositories across the world, fewer than 4% have gone through this process. And so it's a good certification to get. It's a hard certification to get, and it does give us that extra seal of approval, so to speak. Now, how do people find data in our data depot? So first of all, you can search the data depot even not being logged in. You do not need an account to search the data depot. In fact, this screenshot I took, you can tell that I was not logged in because the My Data, the My Projects is not there. That's all that shows up. So I decided, I know I'm not going to be here with an earthquake community, so let me search flood, and let's see what comes up. I know you're not flooding people either, but they relate, right, to the atmospheric research. And so it was interesting to see what came up. So first of all, that first one was actually an experimental data set for in Oregon State University. They have a wave lab, and one of the NERI sites, that's their experimental data. The second one here, nationwide analysis of community-level floodplain development outcomes. A lot of words, sounds like social science to me, okay? East Africa cyclone flooding, field data. So we got experimental data, social science data, field data, and then look at the fourth one. Arc Storm 2.0, atmospheric simulations depicting extreme storm scenarios capable of producing a California megaflood. You may be aware, you may not, that those simulations were actually done here at NCAR. So I thought that was interesting. But they decided to publish their data in DesignSafe. I think a lot of people are still evolving and understanding that simulations create data that other people may want to use. I remember having a conversation with a colleague who does discrete element modeling of individual soil particles. I said, well, you should put that data and publish it. He's like, oh, no one will want that data. And then I tell my colleague who does machine learning, and he's like, oh, I could totally use that data. So you shouldn't only think what you think other people would use. There's a whole world out there. They may actually make use of it. So what does this published data set look like in ArcStorm specifically? They use the other data model, so it's not as pretty as the other ones, but what you can see is if you just want to download the whole thing, which I wouldn't recommend a lot of these big data sets, you can do that. You can also scroll down and just individually group files that you want to download. We provide very easy access to how to cite the data. We put that up at the top because we want people to cite other people's data. We are now tracking data downloads, and ultimately we will be tracking data citations. So it's worth looking at this a little bit, because how do you normalize tracking data downloads or usage when one data set has 1 million files and another data set has like 5? I mean, the 1 million is going to win every time if you just count the number of files. So fortunately, we have this organization called Make Data Count that we've been working with, and they've kind of come up with these 3 different metrics. Unique investigations, which is a 1-hour session during which a user either viewed the metadata or accessed the files. So basically poking around on that site. Unique requests is a 1-hour session during which a user actually accessed the files. So a unique request is always fewer than investigation. Okay? But the key is the 1-hour session. That's how we try and normalize the 1 million files versus the 1 file. And then the total request is just, that's where we just plop it all together. So you can see here, this was for the ArcStorm data set, 1,000 unique investigations, 277 unique requests, 2,200 total requests. A question then, just to give you an idea of how we're doing now, we've only been tracking this the last 2 years. We did DesignSafe, again, I think I might have mentioned, started in 2015, or funding started in 2015. I think we started online in 2017. But in the last 2 years, we've had over 45,000 unique requests across all the DesignSafe data sets. So it's about 1,500 a month. But the question then becomes, okay, let's say we believe unique requests is the metric we care about. What's big? What's a big number? What's a small number? I don't know. So we did a little benchmarking exercise, and I have to credit Maria Steva for kind of leading this effort. We looked at data sets that had been published, and then we looked at over the 12 months after they were published, how many unique requests they had over that 12-month period. So if it was published in January, from January to January, February, from February to February. So we had 182 data sets that we could pull from. And this is just a histogram of the unique requests. So you can see, some are only in less than 5. We kind of benchmark that as kind of low. The middle part, maybe from 5 to 40. And then above 40 would be high, at least relative to our community. And in fact, this tail goes out quite a bit. We have 9 outliers with over 100 unique requests, of course, one of which is the ArcStorm data set. So it's worth talking a little bit more about this data set. I was telling some of you earlier, the way we found out that this data set was in DesignSafe was there was a New York Times article about it, and Maria read it and said, oh, that's interesting, went to the paper, because the New York Times article was written because there was a science article, and then she looked at the science article, and then she looked at the references for the data and saw DesignSafe. I was like, whoa, this is amazing. So we actually went back and looked at the unique requests over time, okay? So you can see blips up and down, and you can relate those to, in fact, there were 2 New York Times articles about this data set. We have an annual data set award, set of awards that we give out for DesignSafe. They were one of our data set award winners, and so you see a little peek there. So it does show you a little bit about the idea of data marketing, whether it's through your paper or LinkedIn, or how different ways we can recognize data. That's get people to come look at your data. So a little bit of looking at how we're doing in terms of scientific impact from the numbers, from the metrics. We've been now for 6+ years manually counting citations. We've tried to differentiate between when simply just says, hey, DesignSafe exists, versus papers where what we call primary data use. I collected the data, I write a paper, I cite my own data, okay. But then that the reason we're publishing data is we hope someone reuses it, right? And so we also try and differentiate between data reuse. And so we can see that the data reuse is definitely going up, and all the citation numbers are going up. The problem is this manual citation counting is a bear. Every quarter we have to report, it's one of our metrics to NSF. Maria just shakes her head when I'm like, oh, our quarterly report's coming up. Maria's like, no, don't make me do it. So it's really become a challenge. And of course, when you have a challenge like that, where do you go to? Typically AI. And so we've started looking at different options. This is only one, but Dimensions.ai is one potential opportunity where if we just but we don't get the granularity. I'm only using the free version for this, but we're going to see where this goes. If we search DesignSafe into Dimensions, we get 1,000 publications or so. It will track those publications over time. So clearly, we didn't start till 2017. And these are the output, so the publications per year that somehow mention DesignSafe. We're not getting that granularity. Is it data reuse? Is it primary data reuse? Or do they just say DesignSafe exists? But we're looking at 250 or so papers a year going up. And then the impact, you can think of that, well, how many citations do these papers get? And again, those numbers are going up 3,000 a year. So things are trending in the right direction. But we're always trying to train our researchers, first of all, to cite the data correctly. I'm not sure how many of you've seen, I've seen people put data citations in the acknowledgments, in the main part of the text. If you don't put them in the reference list, it becomes really hard to track them. And so that's always been my mantra to researchers. Put it in the reference list, just like a paper. Think of a data just like a paper. The last thing to mention with respect to data is how to increase more data publishing. And every community is challenged with this. And I really enjoyed reading this paper, Perceived Benefits of Open Data Are Improving, but Scientists Still Lack Resources, Skills, and Rewards. To be honest, that's an amazing title because it's basically the abstract and conclusions all in the title, right? But the key is we've got sticks and we got carrots, right? What are we going to do? The sticks are we can force people to do it, and that usually works about as well as, I don't even know what to say, but it doesn't usually work very well. Certainly for me, I have no stick on a researcher. Now, funding agencies can require it. And of course, we probably all know that Office of Science and Technology Policy has put out this idea that data from research must be put out freely and available, so that will help. But I will caution us all is that what's going to happen is people are going to do the data publication at the last minute when they've probably forgotten how they got the data, all of the stuff that they did, and so it will not be organized well. That's one thing, is if you can curate your data as soon as after you've developed it and analyzed it, your curation will be much better because your mind is fresh. You remember what the heck you did. The other thing is journals, of course, can require supporting data be published with papers. I think the earth sciences are doing that much better than engineering. Engineering, there's always this cop-out. You can always say, data will be available upon request. And it's a complete cop-out. And I think we need to move beyond that. But on the carrot side, which is where, as a data repository, I think we do have a role to play, we can make it as easy as possible. We can provide the tools and the resources that make it as easy as possible. I remember back, 15 years ago when NEAS was happening, I had a colleague who said, I want tools, not rules, right? Because just stop giving me all these things I have to do, just make it easy to do what I want to do. Provide incentives, so that's part of the reason we have DesignSafe Dataset Awards, so that's an incentive to do a nice data publication. And then give researchers credit for publishing data. And this, again, this is how you can publish a data set. Looks just like a paper. I don't know why it's so difficult. But I will tell you, 10 or so years ago, I was writing papers putting DOIs to data sets, and then the journals were changing them back to the URLs. the DOI, the electronic DOI, they changed it back to the URL. It was in the NIST data repository, and all of those links are now dead because the DOIs got transferred to DesignSafe, so the pointers got changed to DesignSafe, but the URLs are wrong. And what drives me crazy is, I mean, we all write papers, right? They usually give you author queries. I changed this, I changed this. They didn't even tell me that they changed that, so I didn't even know to look. Anyway, enough about that. Okay, so now let's move and talk a little bit more about the compute side and the data and the tools and analysis. So this is what our tools and applications section looked like after we just did this summer, the new interface after our recent release. One big change that was really, we should have thought of this before, because I said you could look at data without logging in. You weren't even able to see what apps and tools we had until you logged in, which was like, oh, well, how are people going to know if they want to get an account unless we show them? So this is now outside the login layer. So we've got simulation codes. We've got codes to support data analysis, lots of different things. And it's worth talking a little bit about our vision of what we're trying to do with the tools and apps section. So first of all, we're trying to lower the barriers of entry for researchers to use simulation tools, high-performance computing, AI, and machine learning. So, and we do that through this tiered approach. We don't expect everyone to just jump on the command line in day one. So these portal apps, which again, you just get them from the web, they are keyed into the HPC on the back end so that you really don't need to know anything about the HPC to get started and see and get a taste. These are mostly our simulation and visualization codes. Then we have our Jupyter lab. Now that runs on a VM, and I'll also talk about, we also have it on some of the HPC resources, GPUs and CPUs. You can use Jupyter as kind of like your workflow engine because of TappyPie, you can do your job submission through the API. So again, you're not having to get quite on the command line, but it's a little bit more sophisticated than what you can do at the portal apps. We also have some relevant AI and machine learning support in the terms of the packages that are needed. And then the third level is, okay, maybe you do need to go to the command line. You're a power user, and we can get you command line access on the various resources at TAC. And of course, those are evolving. When we started DesignSafe, there was Stampede, just Stampede. It wasn't Stampede 1, right? It was Stampede. Now they were up to Stampede 3. Frontera is almost on the end, and Vista's coming up. So there's always new stuff that we're able to use. But throughout DesignSafe, the key is the co-location of tools and data throughout the system. So I'll just give you a look at just some examples. Again, I know this isn't necessarily your field of expertise, but OpenSeas is an open source finite element code that does earthquake engineering for both soil and structural systems. And we have the version OpenSeas MP that runs in parallel. It runs on the HPC systems. And you can see if I decide I want to run OpenSeas, all I need to do is give them the directory where the files reside. I just need to figure out which allocation I want to charge to, which queue on the system I want to go to, and we've got access to the user guide if you're not sure what to select, and it all fits together. Again, you haven't had to SSH into anything. And our user guide attempts to, you notice there were a bunch of OpenSeas, different versions of OpenSeas. This tries to help you understand the different versions of the code, the different applications, and importantly, which resource they run on. Because we have an OpenSeas that works on a virtual machine. We have an OpenSeas that runs on the HPC systems. What about through the Jupyter Notebook? So trying to help users get through that. But as we said, the more documentation you have, the less people want to read it. And in fact, we're working on like an LLM for our documentation that's kind of fine-tuned the documentation so that it would help users find the information they want. Of course, the other thing which probably almost every one of the systems or any scientific gateway or cyber infrastructure has is some sort of Jupyter Hub, Jupyter Lab. It's amazing to me that when we wrote our proposal in 2015, Jupyter didn't really exist. There wasn't really much of it, but we adopted it very, very quickly. So the key here, of course, you have access to all the data depot files. all the publicly available data depot files, plus those private ones you have access to. I'll talk a little bit about the HPC instances of Jupyter. And we've seen people use Jupyter as an interactive data viewer, scripts for data processing, AI machine learning. And the key that I like about it is you publish it so that people can see your workflow and build off of it. And I think that accelerates data reuse and adoption of new things into engineering practice. So in Jupyter here, you can see we've got our VM version up top. We've got the HPC versions down here. You know, again, you've probably all seen these type of interfaces going into Jupyter. But the key here, so this is the VM version. And what I wanted to emphasize here, again, all of the public data are available here. So my data, the NIST published, the NERI published, your projects, everything is here that you should have access to. So you don't need to move it to make use of it and analyze it in the Jupyter Hub. Now, the HPC Jupyter instances are directly on the HPC resources. In the regular VM Jupyter Hub, you can submit jobs to the HPC systems, but these run directly on the HPC resources. So the CPU version is on Stampede 3, provides more memory and speed, so that can be done useful for data processing and parallel computing that you might want on, say, one node. The GPUs, we've got some, they're on the NVIDIA RTX GPU nodes on Frontera. And we have it set up because if you're on GPUs, you're probably doing AI machine learning. So we've got all the AI packages, TensorFlow, PyTorch, CUDA, et cetera, so that you're ready to go. Now the question then becomes, with all of these different bells and whistles, how do we demonstrate to the research community the possibilities? And that is through, we have a bunch of use cases that we've developed with different researchers. And we have a very diverse potential user group, right? Hurricane people and earthquake people do very different things. So we've tried to develop use cases that span the range, right? Of course, everyone's into data analytics here, but we have geohazards, we've got earthquake stuff, wind and storm surge, and so there's a bunch of different examples of how people are using DesignSafe. But I wanted to kind of finish up the talk and focus on a very specific use case, which is a bit unique, but I think does show the power of what we can do. So this is the next generation liquefaction database. You can see there's a lot of liquefaction in this talk, but it's a very, very significant geohazard. So as I said earlier, most of the data in DesignSafe we're set up for files, right? Because we just want you to organize your files. But the liquefaction community said, you know what, we need a more granular, detailed data model. And in fact, they developed their own data model that's very specific to liquefaction. It will make no sense for any other type of hazard. But they went through that exercise, and therefore now they actually publish their data, and they store their data in a relational database. It makes it a bit easier. So the next generation database, let's talk a little bit about NGL. So it's called NGL. They have their own webpage, very long name there. And people can submit data to be part of the NGL database. It gets reviewed, and if it's accepted, it gets put in the repository. But it's all housed in the SQL database. And that database is replicated to DesignSafe daily. And then they've published a bunch of Jupyter notebooks that help users access that data. Okay? Now what's funny is if you go to the NGL researchers who are using this data, they're the seasoned researchers, I'll say, right? They're just like, give me a spreadsheet. I need a flat file, give me a spreadsheet. But the next generation of researchers within the next generation liquefaction project are much more open to using these online tools because, look, I can go in here, the Jupyter notebooks, I can use it as a data viewer. I don't have to download it, figure it out. I just click on which site, and this is subsurface data. You don't really care about the details. Or what if now here we got to teach people how to do SQL queries. Okay, let's give them an example. How do you do SQL queries to get the data out? But what's been really amazing, so this is just anyone who wants to kind of take a look at the NGL data. But there are a subset of of researchers that are part of the NGL project. And the current NGL database is pretty big. We have, relatively speaking, 450 liquefaction sites, 1,000 subsurface CPT profiles, 1,000 boreholes, 200 shear, lots and lots and lots. I don't need to do the numbers. But all the data interpretation and analysis is happening in DesignSafe through the Jupyter Hub. And benefit of that is you're always working with the most up-to-date data set, right? Somebody changes something. If I sent you a flat file, you don't know that there was like 10 more data sets. And just to give you an example of the types of things, again, I know you're not geotechnical engineers, but again, they're looking at the profiles and interpreting them, figuring out which layer actually liquefied. When we look at a site that's liquefied, we usually have like imagery, and we've got field observations of cracking, but then we have the subsurface data, but then we have the lab test data. One-stop shop, data integration. Again, this is all done. You can see it up here, DesignSafe Jupyter. And then, yeah, what if we want to do more sophisticated analysis? They're trying to develop liquefaction prediction models, and here they're doing a Bayesian liquefaction triggering model using the PyMC package, all again within DesignSafe. So the key is they're doing data cleanup, but also high-end data analysis as well. So my last slide, I'll just talk a little bit about community impact and just a snapshot of our community dating back to when we started in 2015. So we have over 9,000 user accounts. If we do also track the fact that, researchers come and go, grad students come and go, we do get about 2,000 users who log in every year. So we're kind of tracking how many people are coming in each year. We have over 300 citations of our marker paper, 100 training events, over 5,000 attendees across those, over 200 outreach events. Our web hits are in the hundreds of thousands for our training and documentation. We do have over 1,000 data sets published in DesignSafe. And we have a DesignSafe Slack team where anyone who gets a DesignSafe account then can join the Slack team. And it's used extensively in so many different ways. We see them interacting with, say, maybe some of the software developers at TAC. When we have hurricanes, like we just had hurricanes go through Florida. The field teams that are going out with the rapid facility, they're using Slack to communicate with each other. So you join the Slack channel for that hurricane or that earthquake, and you've got all your communications documented. And so people are using it for user support as well as this kind of interaction with other researchers. So concluding, just a couple of concluding remarks. It's clear data, tools, computational resources have always been critical in natural hazards research. And we are trying to fill that gap. So all those things come together. I strongly feel, and I think the next generation of researchers feel the same, that our research advancements are facilitated when we share. And to be honest, it's not sharing only data that's sharing everything that makes your data reproducible somewhat is going to be key. So, of course, we want electronic publishing of data, but also scripts, also tools, also workflows, so people can build off of other people's research more easily, with proper credit always given. And it is DesignSafe. Our strategy is to link all those pieces together. Co-locating the data, tools, and resources, lowering the barrier of entry for new researchers, and facilitating the various types of computational workflows that people want to do, whether they're trying to do surrogate modeling, AI machine learning, uncertainty quantification, model calibration, things I haven't even touched on. But there's so many things that people can do when you bring all those things together. And so with that, I'll conclude, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thanks, Ellen. Lots of themes that are aligned with some activities that we're doing here, I'll say that. Do we have any questions from the audience? And let me know if anybody's online. If you're online, go ahead and use Slido.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the talk. It's really interesting. I'm curious when it comes to like the applications and tools part of the DesignSafe website, those are clearly, domain-specific applications and tools. What's the process look like, if somebody was designing or developing a new application or tool that they wanted to then get put onto that page? What does that look like?
That's a great question. We've always had the objective to be a community extensible cyber infrastructure. I will say right now we're still at the point where if you have a tool that you want to get added, you give it to the TAC folks, and then they've got to make a TAPIS app so that we can make it work in there. And so we still have to be the middleman because of the complexities of how things fit together. But as we move into what we're calling DesignSafe 3.0, because we're about to we're writing a renewal proposal for our third 5-year grant, that's something that is high on our list to help researchers make that jump so that they could just add those things.
This is sort of a basic question, though it seems like a super awesome resource that you all have developed. Can you cite a frozen version of a data set? I know that's something that journals can be
so the
picky about.
published, and I probably didn't explain it well, is when you publish it, it is frozen with a DOI. So you have your project, and you don't actually have to publish everything in your project. You decide which files get put in this frozen area with a DOI. Now, the other thing, though, that freezing things also scares people, right? Oh, what if I made a mistake? What if I forgot something? We do have a versioning mechanism. So if you realize you forgot something, you want to add something, you can publish a version 2. Version 1 still is available, because if someone used version 1, they want to make sure they know what was there. Version 2 gets published. It's the same DOI, but it's just called version 2. And then in the interface, the user has to explain what was changed between version 1 and version 2. So, yep, that's the key.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I've got 2 questions that might be hopefully somewhat related.
Okay.
Question 1 being, you talked a lot about data organization and kind of putting a lot of effort into the organization, but I'm curious if there are like metadata standards that go along with that, if you have any sort of standardization or quality metadata that is required to describe the data sets. Which would lead to the second question, I think, then, is there, if you have over 1,000 published data sets, is there a clean way to search the database if you didn't know exactly what you were looking for? And would that rely on some metadata, perhaps, not just the title?
Yeah, thank you. So most of our metadata is kind of more of like the data site metadata, right? It's like, who are the authors, who are the what? So we don't have technical metadata. Because the metadata that this data set needs versus that data set needs is very different, right? Like, oh, if I have maybe the spatial resolution matters here, but that doesn't matter over there. So we don't have that. But then to go to your question about search, because search then becomes a bit more challenging. So the search that we have now, search is more than just the title. It's the description and all the descriptions, but it doesn't go into the data set. So another thing that we're working on right now as we move into DesignSafe 3.0 is some sort of semantic search that uses knowledge graphs so that you could actually do a more intelligent search. I want all of the column tests that were run on concrete columns in shaking tables. And then boom, you would get that and we'd be able to see it. So that's kind of the next level, and it's the only way when you have such diverse data sets that you'll be able to do those type of intelligent searches.
Any other questions in the audience?
So you mentioned support and kind of your data office hours. Is one person enough? I mean, how many requests do you get? I mean, I'm just curious because support can be a bottleneck, right?
It absolutely can, and in fact, that always seems to come up in our site visit. Like, is Maria overextended? Is she doing too much? We're probably at the point, if we get too much bigger, we would need some more support. Well, that's part of the reason, like, the whole data citation, if we can automate the data citation counting, that removes that. What you find with the data office hours is people come once and then they understand how to do it. And so then, you're trying to you're not giving them fish, you're teaching them how to fish, right? So they don't really come back, and every time she'll say, oh, every time Ross Boulanger publishes a data set now, it looks good because I met with him 2 years ago. So in fact, we kind of had a peak, and I think we're kind of a bit over the peak because we've trained enough of the researchers. Now, grad students are a different thing because grad students come and go, but it's not scaling as fast as it was in the beginning because of that.
We have an online question from Eric Nienhaus. Thanks for the great talk. You mentioned using LLM for DesignSafe user documentation. It sounds like you are early in this process. Can you provide a bit more on that work or direction?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit, but I'll acknowledge I'm not the expert. So, so first, we started using OpenAI, right? But then, just to test it out, right? But then how do you scale that up to having all the user, like you're going to say, all right, you have to have paid are we going to pay for their access to OpenAI, or are we going to expect them to have a key to that? So we are training our own LLM that'll be open source, and Llama, thank you. I was like, Llama is what we're using, and so that will be able to source it and provide access to the results for free. But you get what you pay for. It's a little more challenging now when you're trying to do it with open source tools. So that's kind of the bottleneck. And I look forward to talking with you this afternoon, Eric.
I have a question just
Hey, did
about
someone love my sharing and
But-
comparing
so
thing?
I
Okay, I
did.
didn't see that. Sorry.
about so you have an archival, and then there's also real time. So like, where the line
Yes.
between like when do you start moving stuff into the archival? How does that work?
So it's the user who decides to put it into the archival side because they say, I want to publish. And it goes into, we actually have a Fedora data repository. And so that's where it actually gets copied over and is in that frozen space. And so then you could even change the same file names in your project. It doesn't change what's over there. Okay.
Any final questions from the audience or online? I had one question just regarding, you had different project spaces set up, and maybe there's a project where they collaborate on a research problem. They use a Jupyter Hub instance and share a lot of codes and different things. Do you have any plans at all to do something in general? So we have a data depot. Would there be a software depot where I could look up different solutions for different scientific research workflows, that type of thing?
So you mean outside of natural hazards? Or
Well, within the DesignSafe,
Yeah.
you have like published data sets. Is there
Yeah.
some analogous
So-
and published workflows
So the thing
or
is,
something?
we started with the idea of data, and I don't want to change the name of the data depot, but you'll find codes in the data depot. You can publish anything in the data depot. And the other thing that we're working on this year is realizing that software development doesn't happen in DesignSafe. Software development happens in GitHub, right? And you can publish your data set there. Now you can get a Zenodo DOI, but maybe rather than get a Zenodo DOI, why don't you get a DesignSafe DOI? And that'll make it more discoverable through our data depot. Now, should we change the name of the data depot to the data and software depot? I don't know. Data depot has such a nice ring to it. So, but
A lot of places call software data, so there's some official definition. But anyway, we don't have to get into that.
But we've talked about, we have specific guidelines that we're trying to work on to help people through that process of software publishing.
All right, thanks. Okay, if we don't have any more questions, we're at the top of the hour. So
Perfect.
thanks again, Ellen, and
All right, thank you all.
appreciate you coming out.